We talk about the awful performance of Monster Hunter Wilds a lot in this channel, and that's because I think it will hold back what otherwise is a great game. But do you ever wonder exactly why it is so unoptimized? Most importantly, why is Nvidia cards outperforming AMD cards, even higher end AMD cards that in almost any other game would easily beat Nvidia? I am not here to throw a conspiracy, I am not an AMD loyalist, I don't even own AMD hardware, and for all I know, the optimization of this game is ultimately just an unmitigated disaster that is way too late to meaningfully change. The game is coming out in a month. But whether Nvidia had a hand or not in this, it doesn't change the fact that Capcom is, whether unwillingly or willingly, doing their dirty work. They are doing Nvidia's bidding. But how could Nvidia, a GPU company, be making Capcom, a video game company, make decisions that actively push people to buy Nvidia graphics cards? The story starts with a practice that we call engine consultancy. Companies like Nvidia or AMD or console manufacturers or even engine developers, of course in this case Capcom has their own engine, but sometimes, for example, Unreal will do this. They offer free help to developers in the form of usually engineers. They will loan out some of their engineers to do some of the technical work for the game, or they will also offer you some sort of tool or something to help optimize the game. And for both companies it makes sense. The hardware manufacturer gets to look really good because the game runs really well on their hardware, and the developer gets to look really good because their game is better. So everybody wins, right? But what if you convince developers to make decisions that actively hurt your competitors? Let's see what changed between Monster Hunter World, the previous main release installment, and Monster Hunter Wilds. We have a completely new engine, that is the RE engine that worked just fine, by the way, on single player games like Resident Evil 2 Remake, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, even though it already has a terrible track record in open world games like Dragon's Dogma 2, which is, to this day, infamously a technical disaster. And yes, this is the main culprit right here. Capcom is using technology that they made for a use that it is not designed for. An air conditioner can cool you off your house, but it is not a good freezer. And this is not me saying that proprietary engines are the problem. As a matter of fact, some of them can perform much better than commercially available engines. EA Frostbite was amazing for its time. It could achieve similar performance than Unreal engines can do today 10 years ago. Just you look at Need for Speed 2015 and compare it to a modern game, it looks the same. But it is hard to believe that using an engine designed for a completely different type of game would not be as good as just using a commercially available engine that has plenty of tools to work with a game the size and scope of Monster Hunter Wilds. And we should talk about the new changes of Monster Hunter Wilds compared to the previous games that Capcom successfully made in this engine. An average full scene in Resident Evil 2 Remake, that game came out in 2019, it has 2.9 million polygons. It changes of course from level to level, but usually you can see 2.5 to 2.9 polygons rendered in a screen. That includes the buildings, the plants, the cars, the zombies, whatever, everything. And once again, this game is made in the same engine. But if we compare it to Monster Hunter Wilds, the Chatacabra, a low-level boss in the game, that thing has 440,000 polygons. Arkveld has over 800,000 polygons. I know the number gets you a little lost, but compare it to this, okay? Nemesis in Resident Evil 2 Remake had 80,000 polygons. That means that Arkveld has 10 times more polygons than Nemesis. Does it look to you from this picture that there is 10 times more detail? Okay, yes, there is some more detail. I am sure that the geometry of a dragon with chains is a lot more complicated than a person, but does it look to you like there is 10 times more detail? A single boss in Monster Hunter Wilds is taking up a third of the polygons than an entire game in the Resident Evil engine used to take up just 3 years ago. Even an insane amount of polygons on a boss, it would not be a crazy thing in a game like Resident Evil, where you are usually in an enclosed location like a city and the buildings are blocking your view of what's behind, so it doesn't have to render that much stuff. But Monster Hunter Wilds is an open world game, and a huge open world game, with most of the zones being quite bigger than the zones in World. they have to render everything. As long as you can watch forward and there is trees, there is grass, there is mountains, there is rocks, there is other monsters, whatever, you gotta render all of it. So in a game like that, actually you kinda needed those extra 400,000 polygons. They would have actually gone a long way. And it is a little easy to get lost in the polygons and numbers. I should just tell you why it matters, okay? 3D games are rendered by taking geometrical shapes, aka polygons, and using them to form every object in the game. Then your GPU is gonna calculate how those geometrical shapes would be projected into a one-point perspective. That's just the same concept as a camera. And then it generates a pixel grid pattern based on those projections, and that creates a 2D image that we call a frame. Of course, it is way more complicated than that. It doesn't really matter for what I'm trying to explain here. Honestly, I am not the guy to talk about how 3D graphics work, but you don't need to get into the details of that to understand what is seriously wrong with this game. What you need to understand is that the entire game is calculated using geometry, and naturally, if you make the geometry 10 times more complicated, that is gonna make it a lot harder for your computer to run the game. And that is not only a GPU rendering problem, by the way. This game also has huge CPU demands for a game of this size. It is not very common nowadays that a game can be bottlenecked by the CPU, but there is a lot of people that are having CPU issues in this game. As a matter of fact, the excessive use of polygons, particularly for this game and their new features, it makes the problems exponentially worse. Monster Hunter Wilds, compared to World that only had limited day and night cycles, it had a fully fleshed out weather system and day and night cycle, and they need to seamlessly change all the lighting in the environment. And with that comes very complex and very demanding light calculations. Now, I am not here to shield RTX, and as a matter of fact, I am kinda pissed off that they went out of their way to prove them right. And the truth of the matter is that currently, Nvidia has the far superior light calculation technology. I am not saying this will be the case forever, and if anything, the reason that Nvidia is ahead right now is because AMD is just trying to copy whatever buzzword Nvidia is pushing, instead of developing their own technology that could defeat them. That is just the sad reality of today's graphics card market. But you might say, hey, there was a lot of games with a day and night cycle before all of this technology, and there was never a problem. As a matter of fact, there are pretty ancient freaking games with day and night cycles. And that takes us to the second problem with Monster Hunter Wilds. Old games could use several techniques like light maps to take care of the lighting. A light map is basically just having the developer do all the fancy lighting calculations and just baking the results into the game, so they do the computing for you and your computer doesn't have to calculate that in real time. And the reason that Monster Hunter Wilds cannot do that, or at the very least Capcom is unwilling or unable to implement that into the game, because yes, there would be some solutions that could be implemented, is that a lot of the environment is destructible. There is also monster attacks that use dynamic lighting to their advantage, and they look pretty cool. On that, we're gonna give credit where credit is due. For example, the explosions on Arkveld, they look amazing. But all of these environment changes that would demand the lighting to change make it so Monster Hunter Wilds is forced to calculate all the lighting in real time, which obviously is very demanding on any graphics card. Now, there is a lot of ways to do this, and their engine is proprietary, so we do not know the specifics, but this will come at a great cost to your GPU for what most computers are gonna result in honestly a far inferior result than what you could see in World. Just because a game in Ultra is gonna look really cool on an insanely powerful computer, it doesn't mean that the average consumer is gonna see the same. As a matter of fact, I think the reason that Ray Dow lags the game when he does his thunder explosion is because of those thunders doing a lot of light that has to be calculated. And this creates a compound problem. The lighting calculations are more complex than they used to be, and the geometry is more complex than they used to be. So the lighting has to travel through more complex geometry, and that creates far more complex calculations. And it doesn't end there, because Monster Hunter Wilds is also a huge burden on your CPU, and that is because complicated geometry makes CPU calculations a lot harder too. The physics engine, did you hit a monster on the head or the chest, all those things are calculated using geometry as well. As a matter of fact, a big problem, and you can see in the benchmark that a lot of people have CPU bottlenecks in the little town area of the benchmark, and my theory is that it is because there is a lot of NPCs and they are trying to walk, and the poor things trying to walk are just having such a hard time. But yes, there has been a lot of games that had a lot of polygons before, and it is only Monster Hunter Wilds that is having such a hard time running well, so why is it them in particular? And the reason is rather simple. Games with very high fidelity graphics usually have some sort of tool to simplify the calculations of the geometry. I do not know the specific of every game, but for example, the most famous or well infamous is Nanite in Unreal Engine. That is a tool that can simplify a lot of the geometry. And yes, I know that Nanite gets a lot of hate, and probably for good reason. It is maybe not the ideal tool for every job, but at the same time, Monster Hunter Wilds is either using an inferior makeshift solution or most likely no solution at all. And the other reason that these tools get a lot of hate is because they wouldn't even be necessary if they just simplified the models. Modelers need first to achieve the shape that they want, they need to draw all the textures that go on top, and that is only the first part of this. To achieve the shapes they want, they are not really concerned about efficiency or mathematics, they are artists, they are 3D artists. And it is after the model is done that then somebody else comes in and uses several techniques or tools to simplify the geometry of the model. It is 100% possible to simplify the models without losing any fidelity. We are talking about 10 times more polygons. There is a lot of fat that can be cut in here. The problem is, one, it takes a lot of skill, not anybody can do this, and two, it takes a very skilled designer, a very skilled artist to go in and use some sort of techniques, some sort of tricks to generate the illusion of depth in the areas that got simplified. That is mostly used by shading in the textures. But it can be done, it can 100% be done. The problem is that costs money. That people that do it, you gotta pay them. Nvidia is gonna take care of them, or Unreal is gonna take care of them, or they are just gonna pass the cost to you, their consumer, buying a better graphics card. It's your problem now. And don't you think for a minute that you, the console player, didn't get screwed over, because consoles are also based on AMD, both PlayStation and Xbox are based on AMD, and they targeted 30 FPS for the console, so they had no intention of optimizing this thing. And all of this added complexity on top of an engine that doesn't have good tools to simplify the complexity like the commercially available engines do. It means that to achieve a decent frame rate, they are gonna have to use some crutches. And once again, this corner coding benefits Nvidia a lot. Monster Hunter Wilds is using two different crutches to run a decent frame rate in the game, and one of them is upscaling. And that's the main reason that this game looks like a blurry mess. The lighting gets calculated per pixel, the geometry gets calculated per pixel, so if you have less pixels in the screen, that is a lot less calculations. And then what they do is that the graphics card with some sort of AI filter or upscaling, they just make the screen bigger. It is not a lossless conversion and a lot of detail will be lost, but technology has come a long way, and once again, Nvidia currently with DLSS has the far superior offering on this technology. DLSS is nothing short of impressive. It is really good technology. It may not be lossless, but it is pretty freaking good. It is the best in the industry. And if that was it, I would not have a problem with it. The thing is that Nvidia only allows you to use DLSS on cards that are 20 series or later. So you need a relatively recent card, and it has to be Nvidia. That is not a common practice, by the way. Intel and AMD allow you to use their upscaling technology in any card, even cards they didn't make. And since Nvidia knows that they have the better upscaling and they only allow you to use it on their Nvidia cards, it stands to benefit Nvidia a lot that you have a game that requires, if not outright demands, that you use upscaling to get any sort of decent performance. The second crutch Capcom is using currently is also frame generation. That is also far superior in Nvidia than in their competitors. Frame generation is basically taking 2 frames of a game and generating a frame in between with AI that will in effect be a fake frame. And before we go to the obvious downsides, the reason that people hate frame gen is because nowadays developers use it not for their intended use, but as a crutch to claim they have 60 FPS, even though anybody can tell this is not 60 FPS. You see, frame generation and to an extent also upscaling were designed for people with high frame rates and high resolutions to make their game look a little nicer on big monitors or TVs. And it turns out that putting a frame in between two frames when you're going at 244 FPS is a lot freaking easier than making it at 30 FPS, because the frames are a lot closer to each other, and that means there is going to be a lot less artifacting. It doesn't even take a very good AI to generate a frame in between. But in low frame rates, it creates what we call ghosting. That is just artifacts that are created when a frame is just blended together with another frame. Take a look at this. It looks awful. Also, by definition, frame generation will introduce more delay, more input lag into your game, because it has to wait for the next frame to generate a frame in between. And when you are running at 240 FPS, generating an extra frame in between is not a big deal, right? It's a 200th of a second. But when you are running at 30 FPS, one frame of lag is a huge deal. You can absolutely feel a frame of lag. Not to mention it will probably be more than one frame of lag. And it is both of these crutches that make DLSS a far superior choice, if not outright a necessity, to run this game on a graphics card that doesn't cost $900. But does it mean that Capcom is secretly working with Nvidia to make the game? People get the feeling that when I say this, it means that just came Nvidia with a big bag of money and they told them, Capcom, just make the game suck, okay? The truth of the matter is that Capcom wants the game to run on as many computers as possible, because the more people that can play the game on their computer, the more potential customers. If you cannot run the game, you are not gonna buy the game. But on the other side of this cold fact calculation, video game optimization is expensive. Simplifying the models is expensive. Investing in tools like Nanite or whatever they would have to implement in their engine is expensive. Engineers are expensive. Not to mention, they would have to release the game later because they would have to spend more time optimizing, and extra development time is expensive. Capcom ran them numbers and they decided that the money that they would spend to optimize the game is not gonna be compensated by the extra sales they would get if the game ran better. Whether they are right on that or not, that is a different question, but that is what they believe. To add insult to injury, Nvidia does indeed offer free assistance to game developers to optimize the games, and of course it is free, you are gonna take it. Now, I do not think even Nvidia tells the engineers to make the games suck on AMD on purpose. It is just a matter of fact that they work for Nvidia. They are not gonna get fired for making AMD not run good. That is not what they are there for. And honestly, it is not even fair to expect Nvidia to pay for optimization for their competitors. And that takes me to my point here. I think both AMD and Intel, the new competitor in the market, need to seriously invest into helping developers work with their technology. Nvidia is always going to win if they are the only people in the room, especially because given the market, if there is one company that doesn't have to do it, it is Nvidia. Nvidia is, according to Steam, 88% of the market on PC. Once again, follow the money. Is it fair that you should spend double the time optimizing the game for the 11% of the market instead of the 88% of the market? Probably not. That is what they think anyway. On top of that, the reality is that Capcom is targeting a first world audience, a console heavy audience, and those are people that either do not need a graphics card because they are on console, or they can have an easier time affording it. It is hard to believe that a game like Fortnite or League of Legends would have the same success if they ran poorly, but Capcom is in a very weird position where they have the luxury. That is not the audience they are going for. And sadly, I don't think there is a lot we can do here. Of course, just saying that we prefer 60 FPS if that comes at the cost of graphic fidelity, that's a start. It's something, but as long as we keep buying the game, nothing is gonna really change. Why would they listen? And yes, I am part of the problem. I bought the game. But what is your situation? What are you gonna do? Can you run the game well right now? Are you gonna have to buy a graphics card? I personally got a good deal on a second-hand graphics card, and I am gonna post some new benchmarks very soon. And I can tell you, if you have the option, please buy second-hand. After the crypto crash last year, there is a lot of cards on the market for very good prices, and remember that every time you buy a used graphics card, Nvidia doesn't make a dime. I am not loyal to GPU brands because they are not loyal to me, so why should I? Subscribe, join the Discord, and thank you for watching.